The church lights were still on when the Hendrickson family vanished in Munising, Michigan, a small town on the shores of Lake Superior, where the Hiawatha Forest begins, just a few miles from the rooftops. The October weekend arrived with thick, cold fog and lake winds blowing through the logging roads that lead deep into the woods. At 9:37 p.m., an acquaintance in the community stood in the church parking lot, watching as the 6 family members climbed into a borrowed pickup truck, the headlights cutting through the early darkness. They had just left a familiar memorial service, heading back to their remote log cabin where they lived in the middle of the forest, a route they had taken hundreds of times before. The witness watched the taillights turn off the main road, glide past tree trunks, and disappear around the curve leading into the old-growth forest. What happened in the hours that followed, amid the fog, cold winds, and silence of Hiawatha, would haunt Munising for more than a decade afterward. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In late October 1998, Munising entered the first cold days of the season, when fog from the surface of Lake Superior crept into the Hiawatha Forest, and the winding logging roads became quieter than usual. In that isolated area, among the old pine canopies and cleared land from the previous logging season, the 6-member Hendrickson family lived in a small log cabin owned by landowner Richard Goyer. They were a seasonal working family, accustomed to the rhythm of forest life, working when the logging sites were open, resting as winter approached. Their cabin was set deep back, with only one single access road, connecting to the main road via a narrow logging road, often covered in fallen leaves and mud. On the evening of October 17th, the Hendrickson family drove out of the forest to attend a memorial service at Munising Baptist Church. This was one of the rare community activities they attended regularly each year, one of the few occasions when all 6 appeared in front of neighbors and friends in town. Those present at the service that evening clearly remembered the image of the family gathered together, with no signs of anything unusual or anxious. Around 9:30 p.m., they left the church, climbed into Goyer's pickup truck that the family was allowed to use temporarily because their own vehicle was being repaired at the shop. The engine started, the headlights swept across the puddle-streaked parking lot, and then slowly turned toward the logging road leading back to the cabin deep in the forest. A local resident passing by noted that it was the last time all 6 were seen together. The next morning, when the seasonal workers noticed that the Hendrickson couple did not show up at the rendezvous point as usual, they assumed the family was simply taking an extra day off due to the sudden cold weather. By noon, when the mother still did not arrive for her scheduled seasonal job, concern began to spread within the group. Phone calls to the cabin went unanswered. The voicemail was not checked. By afternoon, relatives in Marquette tried calling, but received no response. The children's uncle, who regularly communicated with the family via radio, could not connect either. Neighbors of Goyer tried stopping by, knocking on the door, but inside there was absolute silence. No signs of an argument, no children's voices, no footsteps. The cabin was sealed shut, as if all the residents inside had vanished in one sigh of the forest wind. As darkness began to fall fully, the Hendrickson family's relatives decided to drive more than 40 minutes through the empty roads to check the cabin directly. The deeper they went into the forest, the colder and damper the air became, with low-lying fog making the old tire tracks on the logging road fade as if they had never existed. The cabin appeared in complete darkness. Doors locked, porch empty, no lights, no sounds, no signs that anyone had just been living there. The pickup truck the family had used the night before was not there. No items left in the yard, no signs of haste or disturbance. The silence stretched to the point of becoming suffocating, and it was in that moment they realized this was no longer a normal delay. With growing unease, they returned to their vehicle and called the Alger County Sheriff's Office, reporting that the entire Hendrickson family had disappeared without a message or trace. The call was routed to the dispatch center that night, and just minutes later, Sheriff Philip Marwick left his office, driving through the thick fog into the Hiawatha Forest. By the time he neared the cabin, it was completely dark, with a thin layer of snow lingering from the previous night, covering the entrance, obscuring any potential traces. Marwick stopped his vehicle dozens of meters from the cabin, turned off the engine, and slowly swept a flashlight around the perimeter before approaching. The front door was locked from the outside, but showed no signs of forced entry, hinges unscratched, wood surface undamaged or cracked. He checked the 2 front windows, glass intact, not broken or pried, snow on the sills completely flat, no footprints or slide marks. Circling to the back, the sheriff noted the same condition, back door locked, snow even, no signs of anyone entering or exiting the cabin since the previous night. No fresh tire tracks on the ground, except for some grooves already blurred by frost, to the point where timing could not be determined. The cabin stood silent in the forest, as if unoccupied for many days. Before completing the perimeter check, the sheriff recalled the initial description from relatives: no one went to work, no contact, no message. At that point, he saw no evidence of intrusion or violence, but what concerned him was the absolute absence of any signs of activity, highly unusual for a cabin housing 6 people. As the sheriff prepared to return to his patrol vehicle to file the initial report, Richard Goyer appeared at the edge of the forest, approaching from a trail leading to his main property. Goyer said he had seen the police vehicle entering and came to see what was happening. The sheriff asked about the Hendrickson family, and Goyer explained that a few days earlier, the family had mentioned going to Wisconsin for a short time to visit relatives, and he assumed they had left without notifying anyone. The explanation sounded simple, but the sheriff noted vagueness in how Goyer recalled the timing of their departure and his inability to specify exactly when he last saw them. Nevertheless, with no signs of crime or unusual evidence on the cabin grounds, the sheriff could not treat the site as a tampered or forced scene. After completing the initial assessment, Marwick returned to his vehicle, contacted dispatch, and officially opened a missing persons, 6 individuals file. In the report, he noted that the prolonged absence, combined with all 6 losing contact simultaneously, was considered a high-risk situation. He requested activation of Michigan's standard search protocol for missing persons in deep forest terrain, checking the area around the cabin in a close radius, deploying K-9 units, establishing a preliminary perimeter, and mobilizing search forces the next day. Though there were no signs of despondent behavior or foul play, the sheriff concluded that the abnormality was serious enough to treat the Hendrickson family's disappearance as a genuine missing persons case, not a voluntary departure. With that decision, the official search began. Early the next morning, as the first light of day filtered through the dense pine canopies of the Hiawatha Forest, the search team entered the initial phase around the Hendrickson family cabin. Sheriff Marwick deployed a K-9 unit from the Michigan State Police, having the tracking dogs start from the front door of the cabin and expand outward. The dogs followed a narrow path leading to the back, where the carpet of dry leaves was covered by a thin layer of snow that erased any potential footprints. Nevertheless, the canines maintained a response to human scent, moving in wide arcs around the cabin before pointing toward the main logging road, the only route connecting the cabin out of the dense forest. When the canine team reached the edge of the logging road, the signal weakened. The dogs' circling movements indicated the scent trail was completely interrupted at the junction between the leaf mulch ground and the hardened mud surface. The canine team concluded that if anyone left the cabin, they got into a vehicle at or near that spot, and the vehicle's departure in the night had blocked all further tracking. This was the first indication that the cabin was likely not the site of conflict or abduction. Instead, the direction of movement likely began from the logging road and extended into the old logging area. From that assessment, the sheriff set up a grid search covering a 2-mile radius around the cabin. Each group was arranged in parallel lines at fixed intervals, moving synchronously to ensure no items, traces, or suspicious areas were missed. This proceeded slowly and meticulously due to the uneven terrain. Many sunken areas from the previous year's logging, old deep tire ruts from heavy machinery covered in snow, and countless fallen trees blocking paths. The search teams used probing rods to check areas covered by thick fallen leaves, while closely observing any unusual mounds that could indicate temporary burial. However, no evidence belonging to the family was found, such as clothing, papers, scattered food, or children's toys. Items that typically appear if people moved in panic or under duress. When teams surveyed side trails branching deep into the forest from the logging road, they noted some sections with old tire marks, but could not date them due to snow cover. The groups tried to identify potential turnoffs that could serve as shortcuts to exit the property, but most trails led to dead ends or looped back to the main logging road. Throughout the hours-long search, the greatest difficulty was not the vast area but the terrain's nature: dense forest with trees growing close together, sunlight barely penetrating the damp forest floor, making observation of unusual signs more complicated. Additionally, nighttime temperatures dropping sharply caused the mud to freeze without new impressions, while hardening existing slides or ruts like stone, making it impossible to distinguish old from new. The search team also thoroughly checked low-lying terrain areas where a vehicle could get stuck or bodies could be hastily dumped, but found only puddles frozen into thin ice, with no cracks or breaks on the surface sufficient to rule out heavy objects falling there in recent days. Furthermore, they scanned tree trunks for cuts, peeled bark, or slash marks that could result from a vehicle forcing through dense growth. But all were old traces from prior logging seasons with no signs of recent human presence. By afternoon, groups assigned to check turnoffs deeper into the forest reported finding no discarded items, no purses, no clothing, no scraps of trash that could have blown from the cabin. This left the search team in a strange state. If the family left the cabin normally, they should appear somewhere in the forest. If they left under coercion or panic, they would leave some trace. But neither occurred. After nearly a full day sweeping the entire forest area around the cabin, Sheriff Marwick reached a preliminary conclusion that the cabin was not a direct crime scene. No signs of struggle, no hasty relocation, no disturbed belongings, and most importantly, no clues indicating the presence or departure of the 6 members that night. Everything seemed erased by just a thin layer of snow and an unusually silent period. The scent cutoff at the logging road became the only direction the search force could rely on to expand the investigation. If the family continued moving after leaving the cabin, they left via this road. But to where, by what means, and in what condition, all remained unanswered questions as the initial search phase ended without finding any evidence or signs of conflict in the immediate cabin area. Immediately after completing the close radius search around the cabin without yielding any useful clues, Sheriff Marwick expanded the search scale to a 10-mile radius, focusing along the main logging roads and side branches leading deep into the Hiawatha Forest. This was considerably more complex terrain. Many abandoned road sections from old logging seasons, crumbling surfaces with frozen mud ruts, fallen trees scattered everywhere, and countless turnoffs nearly lost under thick fallen leaves. The search teams were divided into small groups, each responsible for a specific trail segment, conducting sweeps outward from the cabin to determine which direction the Hendrickson family might have taken the night they left the church. First, they focused on logging roads wide enough for a pickup truck, checking every spot for broken trees, mud sinks, deep tire ruts, or any sign suggesting a heavy vehicle had passed in the last 48 hours. However, most logging roads bore chaotic traces from multiple past seasons, making distinction between new and old nearly impossible under snow cover. As teams moved farther out, they checked side branches leading to 2 shallow lakes on Richard Goyer's property. These lakes were places where logging workers often rested or cleaned tools, so they had old activity traces like campfire ash, cans, or ATV tire marks from years prior. The search team first walked along the water's edge, using long steel probes into the mud near the shore to detect submerged objects, but found nothing noteworthy. The lake surfaces, though shallow, had started freezing in spots, with no cracks or signs of recent heavy impact. Then the group shifted to the damp land around the first lake, where they discovered a small dark red object under the wet pine needles. a child's jacket sized for about 6 to 8 years old. Though not immediately identifiable as belonging to one of the children, the sheriff noted it as the first noteworthy item since the disappearance was reported. The jacket had no major tears or unusual stains, but its location, nearly 4 miles from the cabin in a forest area the Hendricksons had no reason to visit, made the discovery alarming. The search team marked the spot, bagged the evidence per protocol, and continued sweeping the surrounding area, but found no other personal items. Moving to the second lake, the team noted a patchy blackened burn area about 20 meters from the water's edge. This was not a recent fire. The ash had turned light gray, crumbling to dust when touched, indicating it occurred at least weeks earlier. However, the presence of residual ash in early winter and in a remote area prompted the sheriff to note it as another significant anomaly. There were no signs the ash came from biological material or household items, but its existence at this time was enough to add to the follow-up list. After completing the lakeside sweeps, the search teams returned to the logging roads, expanding to lesser-known turnoffs. They marked potential stopping, turning, or redirecting spots while examining eroded or broken banks from vehicle impact. Some road sections had old tire marks, but snow rendered them meaningless for timing. Meanwhile, no signs of struggle, breakage, or scattered items were found across the expanded area. After 2 continuous days sweeping the 10-mile radius, Sheriff Marwick compiled the findings. The cabin showed no intrusion. The immediate area had no evidence. Logging roads provided no fresh vehicle traces. Lakesides had no submerged heavy objects. However, 2 anomalies, the child's jacket and the old burn area, emerged as the only signs inconsistent with a family supposedly going to Wisconsin for a few months. Though not enough to confirm foul play, the sheriff had to acknowledge that these items appearing in remote areas, miles from the cabin and outside the Hendricksons' routine paths, were details that could not be ignored. The expanded search yielded no clear answers, but for the first time, physical clues emerged sufficient to suggest the family's disappearance might not be as simple as the initial explanation. Immediately after completing the expanded search phase without reaching a clear conclusion, Sheriff Marwick shifted his focus to collecting and cross-referencing witness statements, viewing this as a necessary step to reconstruct an accurate timeline for the 30 hours before and after the Hendrickson family was last seen. The first group he contacted was those who attended the memorial service at Munising Baptist Church on the evening of October 17th, where the family made their final public appearance in the community. Most of those present confirmed seeing all 6 Hendrickson family members leave the hall around 9:30 p.m., walking together, with no one displaying any signs of panic or distress. An elderly woman recalled the father holding the hands of the 2 younger children as he walked ahead, while the mother carried the youngest child and exchanged a few goodbye words before the family headed to the parking lot. A young church volunteer confirmed that the pickup they drove away in was a dark-colored vehicle owned by landowner Richard Goyer, which matched information previously provided by relatives. 2 additional witnesses in the parking lot noted that they saw the vehicle's lights turn on, the engine start, and then it slowly left the area heading south, consistent with the route leading to the logging road toward the cabin. These statements established a clear timestamp. 9:37 p.m. was the last time the entire family was seen at a public location. After solidifying the information from the church, the sheriff moved on to gathering statements from residents living near Goyer's property. A middle-aged couple living close to the entrance of the logging road reported hearing a sound like an ATV or small vehicle engine passing by around 11 p.m., a time they considered very late for any activity in the forest. The husband recalled that the sound lasted only a few seconds, as if the vehicle was moving quickly through without stopping. Although they did not see the vehicle due to the darkness and thick fog, this statement was flagged because it aligned with the only direction where the K-9 team had detected human scent leading to the logging road. The sheriff concluded that the vehicle heard was very likely related to the family's movement after leaving the church. From there, the sheriff met again with Richard Goyer to cross-check timelines. When asked about the last time he saw the family, Goyer repeated that they said they were going to Wisconsin to visit relatives, but this time he stated that they mentioned it a few days earlier, rather than a few weeks earlier, as he had said in his initial statement. When the sheriff pressed for details about when they left, Goyer only responded vaguely that they left when I wasn't home. This ambiguity was noted in the report as a second inconsistency, especially since all witnesses confirmed the family was at the Munising church the previous evening. When the sheriff asked about the likely route, if they were truly heading to Wisconsin, Goyer immediately shifted his answer to suggestions that maybe they got a ride from someone or arranged another vehicle, despite everyone knowing that the family's cabin only had access to the pickup they were temporarily using from him. These evasive and inconsistent responses led the sheriff to note Goyer on the list of individuals requiring further monitoring, though there was no specific evidence yet indicating his involvement in any criminal activity. Next, the sheriff visited Ray Nolan, the seasonal logging worker employed by Goyer. Nolan appeared cautious from the start, cautiously stating that he knew nothing about the Hendrickson family's disappearance. When asked where he was on the evening of October 17th, Nolan said he was home all evening, but could not provide anyone to corroborate his statement. When the sheriff shifted to questions about the 2 utility wells that the search team had flagged as noteworthy, Nolan immediately became flustered and said he wasn't involved in digging the wells, despite employment records showing that he was one of the workers Goyer assigned to the task in September. Nolan also refused to answer further when asked if he had seen Goyer's pickup moving unusually on the night of the disappearance. Nolan's evasiveness, similar to Goyer's contradictory statements, was recorded in the file as an anomaly, requiring follow-up in subsequent investigation steps. After completing the round of interviews, Sheriff Marwick began compiling a detailed timeline for the entire 30-hour period surrounding the disappearance. The early part of the timeline was based on church statements. The family left the event at 9:37 p.m. and got into Goyer's vehicle. The next part was based on the resident's statement near the logging road, a vehicle passing by at 11 p.m., heading into the forest. The period from after 11 p.m. until the next morning was completely blank. No witnesses, no sounds, no physical traces, making this interval a suspect gap. By the morning of October 18th, the timeline showed that no one saw the family leave the cabin, none of them appeared at work, and all contact attempts failed. That afternoon, relatives arrived to check and reported to police, officially marking the opening of the missing persons case. Reassembling the timeline did not provide a clear picture of the family's journey after leaving the church, but it highlighted 3 key facts. The cabin was not the scene of an incident, the logging road was the only direction with signs of movement, and the entire disappearance occurred within a narrow window from 9:37 p.m. to 11 p.m. without any direct witnesses. Although lacking specific physical evidence, the inconsistencies in statements and the time gap formed the foundation for the next phase of expanded investigation. When cross-referencing those inconsistencies without yet determining a clear direction, Sheriff Marwick decided to shift focus to Goyer's property holdings, reviewing land maps and improvement permits to identify any terrain changes that occurred just before the family's disappearance. While comparing land maps, he discovered that Goyer's land improvement filings recorded the construction of 2 utility wells during the period from September to October 1998, just a few weeks before the Hendrickson family vanished. Legally, any landowner could build technical wells for drainage purposes, but having 2 new wells in an area with no clear drainage needs prompted the sheriff to flag it as noteworthy. He compared the well locations to the natural flow diagram on the property. Well #1 was on higher ground above a low-lying area, serving no role in reducing water buildup. Well #2 was even more counterintuitive, dug near a logging road section with an upward slope, unrelated to water accumulation or erosion. Even technically, the positions of both wells did not align with any reasonable drainage objective, especially in the fall season, when regional rainfall did not produce minor flooding like in spring. From this observation, the sheriff marked them as terrain anomalies. To confirm the level of suspicion, he sent a terrain survey team for direct inspection. Well #1 had a narrow diameter, and the surface around the rim showed soil compaction harder than normal. Although this did not show clear signs of burial, it differed from surrounding areas that were soft and porous due to years of leaf cover. This unusual compaction was viewed by experts as a mild indicator. Since the specific cause could not be determined, it could result from machinery stopping there or from workers using compacted soil to reinforce the well walls. Well #2 was deeper and had firmer earthen walls, apparently dug to proper technical shape, but its location remained puzzling. When the survey team further checked with geological probes and sounding rods, they detected no unusual hard objects in the upper soil layers, though that did not mean the well contained nothing deeper. Based on overall observations, the sheriff concluded that both wells lacked reasonable functional or locational justification in the terrain. Therefore, he added well #1 and well #2 to the list of priority future forensic sites, locations requiring thorough examination in the future if legal conditions allowed. However, at that time, he could not order immediate excavation because there was no probable cause. Michigan law requires that for excavation or intrusion into an underground structure, investigators must have direct or circumstantial evidence indicating the site's likely connection to a crime. Unusual soil compaction and technically illogical well positions, though noteworthy, still did not meet the legal threshold for a search warrant involving private property intrusion. This created a clear impasse. The two most suspicious locations on Goyer's entire property were the two places the sheriff could not access further. The coincidence that Goyer's well construction filings were submitted just weeks before the Hendrickson family's disappearance heightened the sheriff's alertness, but until additional physical evidence emerged, well #1 and well #2 could only be GPS marked, photographed, and placed on long-term monitoring. This very limitation forced the investigation to shift direction. Based on collected statements, the cabin's location, and the point where the canine lost the scent on the logging road, Sheriff Marwick began the next analytical step, reconstructing all possible routes that Goyer's pickup, the last vehicle seen carrying the Hendrickson family, could have taken after the 9:37 p.m. mark. Tracing the vehicle's path became the central objective, as in the absence of traces around the cabin, no scattered physical evidence, and no witnesses seeing the family leave the forest area after that night, the pickup was the only anchor capable of determining the actual events. The sheriff started by requesting the Alger County Mapping Office to provide complete 1998 logging road diagrams, including main trails, machinery service roads, temporary side branches, and intersections in the old logging area. After overlaying the maps with satellite imagery, he identified 3 plausible travel routes the pickup could have followed after the family left the church and returned to the logging road. However, since logging roads were not public and frequently changed shape with seasonal operations, precisely determining the route from maps alone involved many assumptions and required field verification. Nonetheless, the sheriff identified 3 terrain areas with high likelihood of involvement in disposing or concealing the vehicle. The first area ran along a logging road heading east, leading to a shallow lake with an average depth of about 6 to 8 feet, formed from an old excavation pit gradually filled by rainwater. This was a location where a large vehicle like a pickup could be driven into the lake, leaving minimal traces due to the concave terrain and relatively soft mud and water surface. The second area was a low-lying clearing near regenerating forest, where the ground was softer and trees grew sparsely, sufficient for a vehicle to be pushed in and covered with natural materials. The third area was farther west, where a chain of small lakes connected by water channels existed. A vehicle could be backed down a submerged slope, and even a thin layer of early winter ice would suffice to completely obscure signs of impact. The sheriff believed that if the pickup was disposed of, the highest probability lay in these 3 areas, especially the shallow lake, as water is often an easy long-term concealment site for heavy metal objects with minimal effort. To test the first hypothesis, he mobilized a police team using 1998 era sonar to scan the nearest lake among the 3 identified points. However, sonar technology at that time had low resolution, particularly in cold water, thick mud, and underwater vegetation that obscured echo returns. Repeated scans still produced blurry results, unable to confirm whether a large metal object was on the bottom. The technical team's report concluded that if a vehicle was in the lake, it lay beneath thick mud or in a position where sonar could not distinguish it from the lake bottom terrain. Although no specific results were obtained, the sheriff noted that the mere absence of vehicle tracks on any access roads was itself a suspect indicator. A heavy pickup would typically leave clear tire marks on mud or sand soil, especially on the night of the disappearance when the ground was not fully snow-covered. Yet every logging road the sheriff checked showed only old, faint traces with no ruts indicating recent travel within 24 to 36 hours. This forced Sheriff Marwick to pose a series of questions made more ominous by the silence of the Hiawatha Forest. If the family left the cabin in the pickup, why did the entire logging road system show no new tire tracks? If the vehicle left the area, which direction did it take, and how without leaving traces? Or did someone deliberately move the vehicle to a place where traces naturally erased quickly, such as deep mud, areas disturbed by logging activity, or the nearby shallow lake? No hypothesis had an answer, but the very absence of any traces became a form of circumstantial evidence. The vehicle's travel route had been concealed or executed in a way that allowed the forest to naturally erase all remnants. The three focus areas were thus remarked on the map as the greatest points of suspicion, and the pickup's journey became one of the most prominent anomalies in the disappearance. This was a critical lead that the sheriff noted required expanded checking in subsequent phases. With no clear physical traces obtained at the cabin, on the logging road, or at the shallow lake area, Sheriff Marwick moved to the next step, comprehensively evaluating all investigative hypotheses to determine the most viable direction. He systematized all collected data, including the church departure timeline, the K9 scent loss point, the existence of two suspicious utility wells, the location where the child's jacket was found, the old ash pile, and contradictory statements to construct 5 core hypotheses. The first hypothesis was that the Hendrickson family voluntarily left the area, a possibility always considered in multi-person disappearances. However, the data did not support this direction. The cabin showed no signs of packing, no missing essential items, no evidence of preparing for long-distance travel. The phone had no calls, bank accounts had no transactions, and no one in the community knew of Wisconsin plans, as Goyer claimed. Moreover, the family's lifestyle was closely tied to seasonal work in Munising. All 6 disappearing simultaneously, without any preparation signs, was inconsistent with voluntary departure behavior. The second hypothesis was an accident in the forest or lake. This seemed reasonable initially given the vast Hiawatha terrain, with many pits, shallow lakes, and dangerous trails. A vehicle losing control, sliding into a lake or deep pit, could make locating it extremely difficult. However, the complete lack of new tire tracks, no cracked ice on lakes, no vehicle skid marks on shores, and no items found from cabin to lake, weakened the accident hypothesis. Accidents typically leave physical signs, even minimal ones, but across the entire expanded search area, no indicators provided a foundation for this direction. The third hypothesis involved third-party intervention, that is, an unknown actor appearing in the period after 9:37 p.m. However, the data was divided. The logging road showed only one vehicle passing at 11 p.m., but no witnesses saw strangers in the area. The cabin had no intrusion signs, surrounding property was undisturbed, no signs of struggle or altercation. This made the someone came for them hypothesis insufficient to elevate to primary status. The fourth hypothesis was a staged disappearance, a possibility often examined in whole family vanishings. Yet staging a convincing disappearance would require both time and means. Scene analysis showed the cabin had no packing signs, no evidence they took personal items, valuables, winter clothing, food, or any backup transportation. Additionally, the only route out of the forest required a motorized vehicle. The pickup was their only one, and it too vanished, contradicting the idea of self-staging without a vehicle. Finally, the fifth hypothesis, murder and disposal. This was the heaviest in consequence and required far higher evidence to pursue legally. Physically, the scene did not clearly support it. No blood, no struggle marks, no drag traces, no destructive evidence at the cabin or logging road. However, some factors bolstered foul play suspicion. The illogical functional positions of the two newly dug wells, contradictions in Goyer's statements, Ray Nolan's evasiveness, the child's jacket appearing far from the cabin, and most importantly, the pickup, the last vehicle carrying the family, vanishing without trace. Still, all this only created anomalies rather than sufficient legal basis or direct signs of murder. Upon completing the synthesis of the 5 hypotheses, Sheriff Marwick had to acknowledge that none had enough foundation to upgrade the case classification. Voluntary departure did not fit the family's lifestyle habits. Accident lacked physical trace support. Third-party intervention had no accompanying witnesses or suspicious activity. Staged disappearance lacked all preparation signs, and murder disposal existed only as suspicion based on unprovable anomalies. The absence of tangible evidence left the case in limbo, where each hypothesis had partial plausibility but was blocked by unexplainable gaps. This became a critical juncture. Either a new lead would emerge to break the deadlock, or the state of insufficient, unclear, uncertain would persist indefinitely. In that context, when every hypothesis lacked the weight to be prioritized, Sheriff Marwick decided to shift focus to reviewing administrative and financial data in search of unusual signs in the activities of the Hendrickson family and Richard Goyer prior to the disappearance. The first step was to examine the family's bank accounts, shopping transactions, mail, and employment records. The results showed that in the 3 weeks leading up to October 17th, all spending and transactions were stable, primarily related to food, fuel, and household items. There were no large withdrawals, no sudden transfers, and no bills or receipts, suggesting they were preparing to leave Michigan or travel long distances. Seasonal payroll records also indicated they had been showing up regularly at their workplaces until the last day before the memorial. Additionally, there was no indication that the family was in debt, involved in disputes, or experiencing financial stress that could lead to fleeing or suddenly departing. This reinforced the assessment that they had no economic motive to disappear. After ruling out the possibility of voluntary departure due to financial issues, the sheriff turned his attention to Goyer's documents. While reviewing Goyer's business records and property tax filings, he noted the recurring expense item, well construction, appearing consistently for 2 consecutive months, coinciding with the time when 2 technical wells were identified in the field. Specifically, there were at least 3 large expenditures related to well building materials, excavator rentals, and labor. Even though the land had no recorded drainage issues, according to county land management records. This made the expense particularly noteworthy. Why would Goyer invest in 2 wells whose location and purpose were difficult to explain? Continuing to expand the review, the sheriff requested the personnel list for those working at the logging site during the week of the disappearance. Goyer provided a scattered list of 8 workers who were on site 5 days per week. When cross-referencing with timesheets, the sheriff noted 2 anomalies. First, on October 17th, the day of the memorial, and the last day the family was seen, only 2 people were present in the logging area, Goyer and his assistant, Joseph Mallard. The other workers either had the day off or were working in areas far from the cabin. Second, on October 18th, the day the family was officially considered missing, Mallard's timesheet was completely blank, despite him logging regular hours on the days before and after. Nolan, the worker who appeared evasive when questioned about the wells, was also absent on both October 17th and 18, even though Goyer's internal records showed he typically worked on call on weekends when needed to handle land or trails damaged by rain. The discrepancies between the timesheets and personnel records, combined with the sole presence of Goyer and Mallard in the area during the time the Hendrickson family vanished, became the central focus of this review. The sheriff noted that within the 24-hour period surrounding the disappearance, only 2 individuals were confirmed to be in the vicinity of the cabin and logging road, Richard Goyer and Joseph Millard. There were no witnesses indicating they had left the area before the presumed time of the family's disappearance, and no signs that anyone from outside the logging site had entered the forest that night. Upon completing the compilation of the list of individuals present in the area at the time of the Hendrickson family's disappearance, Sheriff Marwick created a final classification table to clarify the scope of investigative responsibility. Goyer and Millard were placed in the confirmed present group based on statements and work schedules. Nolan fell into the presence unclear group because the timelines he provided did not fully align. All remaining workers were categorized as presence not confirmed due to evidence they were working in areas several miles from the cabin that night. This classification helped narrow the scope of suspicion, but it did not produce the necessary breakthrough. After thoroughly reviewing all financial, personnel, and terrain data, without obtaining any direct evidence, Sheriff Marwick's official investigation was forced to confront the reality of a deadlock. Although the cabin had been searched, the forest swept in a wide radius, the lake shores scanned, statements cross-checked, work schedules analyzed, and 2 suspicious well locations identified, no element was sufficient to upgrade the case from missing persons to criminal investigation. There were no bodies to prove violence, no vehicles to trace a journey, no physical evidence such as blood, drag marks, or signs of breakage, and no indications of forced entry at the cabin. Every anomaly, from the well locations to the child's jacket, though noteworthy, remained isolated fragments that could not yet be connected into a logical chain. In the context of Michigan law, requiring clear evidence or specific probable cause to conduct invasive actions on property, such as digging wells or seizing landowner items, the sheriff had to acknowledge that he lacked the legal basis to take any aggressive investigative steps. Search teams had all withdrawn, sonar detected no vehicles under the lake, and no new witnesses emerged. All lines of information fell silent. Over the next 2 years, the Hendrickson family disappearance file remained open at the county level, but saw no actual investigative activity beyond occasionally receiving sporadic reports from local residents, most of which were unverified or irrelevant. By late 2000, the entire file had become stagnant. In early 2001, after one final review yielding no new leads, Sheriff Marwick officially closed the county-level investigation and recommended transferring the file to the Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit. In the transfer documents, he included an internal note, possibility of staging, unverified, pointing out that although there was no direct evidence proving foul play, unexplained anomalies persisted, such as the well construction timeline, time gaps, and the simultaneous disappearance of the entire family and their vehicle. The Hendrickson file was closed as unsolved, not because the case was considered concluded, but because no further investigative measures could be pursued at the local level within the existing legal framework. From the time of transfer, the Hendrickson family disappearance officially entered cold case status, a file quietly existing in the system without answers or new directions, awaiting a clue strong enough to break through the impasse that had persisted since October 17, 1998. Nearly 6 years after the Hendrickson family file was transferred to the Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit, the case saw virtually no significant progress. Documents were stored properly, information gradually digitized as required by the new system, but everything remained dormant in the unsolved case archives. There were no new witness calls, no unusual reports from local residents, and no physical evidence found in the Hiawatha Forest since 1998. It wasn't until the end of the 2007 hunting season that a small clue emerged, creating a brief ripple of information, but not enough to generate real momentum. On a late November morning, a local hunter was moving through the regenerating forest area near Well Hash 1, a location the sheriff had marked years earlier as high risk. While tracking a stray deer into low brush, he spotted a small object lying among dry grass and decayed pine needles. It was a light brown child's shoe, sized for a child aged 7 to 9. The shoe was no longer new, with one lace broken and the sole showing characteristic wear from prolonged use. Though it appeared old, its location raised alarm for the hunter. The area was about 4 miles as the crow flies from the Hendrickson family cabin, close to the edge of the old construction road. Goyer had machinery run through years before, and especially only about 40 meters from well #1. The hunter brought the shoe to the Alger County Sheriff's Office that same day, knowing the area was tied to the 1998 disappearance. The sheriff's office accepted the evidence, logged it into the incident book, and stored the shoe in the evidence room. However, by 2007, the county's budget was insufficient to conduct extensive tests like DNA analysis on fabric fibers or trace biological evidence. Thus, the shoe was simply photographed, labeled, placed in a preservation bag, and stored in evidence without further analysis. This was not due to negligence, but rather the technical and financial limitations at the county level during that period. After receiving the evidence, the sheriff's office notified the MSP cold case unit per standard procedure. The unit reviewed the report, archived the photos and description, but concluded that a single child shoe, of unknown ownership and showing no signs of violence-related damage, could not serve as grounds to reopen a file dormant since 2001. The shoe could belong to a family on a past outing, a child accompanying logging crews from earlier seasons, or even have been carried there by animals, especially in a wild forest where items can shift over time. Despite the shoe's location near well #1, a previously flagged suspicious point, the cold case unit had no legal basis to excavate, dig, or take soil samples. They also could not compel the new landowner to allow deeper inspection without evidence suggesting the well contained items related to a serious crime. From a professional standpoint, the new evidence was sufficient only to note, but not to act. The cold case unit issued an official assessment. The shoe was a potentially related clue, but of undetermined legal value, noting that additional evidence directly linking it to the Hendrickson family would be needed to validly reopen the file. On the Alger County Sheriff's side, while viewing the discovery as a point of interest, they acknowledged it did not alter the overall case picture. There was no DNA evidence to confirm the shoe's owner, no second item to support a hypothesis, and no additional witnesses following the report. The case thus remained in its familiar suspended state, showing tantalizing signs yet completely lacking the foundation for any new investigative steps. Nevertheless, one important detail was added to the file. The shoe was found at a location Sheriff Marwick had years earlier marked as one of the most anomalous points in the disappearance. Though not enough to reopen the file, it became a small but persistent entry in the digitized report stored by the cold case unit. For many years afterward, it existed merely as a static data page, an isolated piece of evidence, unanalyzed, unmentioned, and insufficient to drive change. But its appearance inadvertently became one of the first puzzle pieces setting the stage for a major shift, many years later, though no one in 2007 could foresee that. By 2010, when the Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit began implementing a program to review long unsolved missing persons cases with the goal of applying new technological advances, the Hendrickson family file was pulled back for reconsideration. The reason was not the emergence of new leads, but the fact that two pieces of evidence previously deemed legally insufficient, the child's jacket found in 1998 and the shoe discovered in 2007, could now be analyzed using improved DNA techniques that did not exist at the time the evidence was originally collected. The cold case unit retrieved the file from storage and requested the transfer of all related evidence, including the jacket, the shoe, crime scene photos, old soil samples, and any documents describing their original locations. The primary objective was to determine whether any trace biological material remained on the two items, whether sweat, skin cells, or adhering fibers. In many other missing persons cases, new DNA technology had previously salvaged evidence thought useless due to age, so the investigators considered reanalysis an essential step. Concurrently, The cold case unit also contacted surviving relatives of the Hendrickson family to obtain reference DNA samples for comparison if any traces remained on the evidence. 3 relatives were identified: an uncle in Marquette, an aunt in Escanaba, and a cousin in Wisconsin. All agreed to provide blood and buccal swab samples through the official procedure. This created a set of reference DNA that could be used for matching in any future scene analysis, something the 1998 investigation never had due to technical limitations at the time. Beyond the physical evidence, the cold case unit also re-examined all information related to the 2 technical wells that Sheriff Marwick had years earlier flagged as geographically unusual. By 2010, a new tool had become standard in geological surveys: advanced ground-penetrating radar, with much higher resolution than the older GPR models some local agencies had used in the early 2000s. The new equipment allowed detection of deep soil disturbances, voids, large objects, or abnormal compaction zones without excavation. When MSP technicians reviewed the 1998 report describing soil compaction around well #1, they noted that this was the type of data the new GPR could directly verify and more accurately assess, especially since the area had no major construction and relatively simple terrain, resulting in less signal interference. From this, the technical team assessed the feasibility of using GPR at both wells and submitted an internal report. Well #1 and well #2 areas are suitable for supplemental GPR survey. Recommend considering new equipment to detect deep soil disturbance. A formal proposal was drafted: conduct a 2010 generation GPR survey of well #1 and well #2, with the goal of determining whether there were man-made structures, unusually compacted soil layers, or large objects below the surface. However, the cold case unit was fully aware of legal limitations. GPR surveys on private property required landowner permission or a court order. Since the original owner, Goyer, had died a few years earlier, ownership had transferred to a small property management company that had never been approached or asked to cooperate in the 1998 file. The cold case unit assessed that obtaining permission for GPR would be far easier than for excavation, as GPR is non-invasive and often approved in missing persons cases. But before submitting the request, they wanted to further determine the value of the long-held evidence. The lab began running the new generation DNA analysis process. The 1998 jacket still had 2 clusters of fibers that could contain skin cells, and the 2007 shoe had an unidentified dark stain. Although it could not yet be confirmed whether human DNA was present, the fact that the evidence was re-entered into analysis created a significant shift. The Hendrickson case was no longer dormant in storage, but became one of the active cases under the review program. Evidence data was recoded in the modern evidence system, making it easier for the cold case unit to track developments. By late 2010, after completing the assessment of new technology applicability, the investigative team prepared a summary report affirming the 2 wells identified in the 1998 file require GPR survey. Evidence requires supplemental DNA analysis. Case suitable for re-evaluation within the next 12 months. Although no breakthrough results existed at that point, the 2010 review steps laid important technical groundwork, providing the basis for re-examining the entire scene in the context of technology and investigative methods that had advanced to a completely new level compared to the year the Hendrickson family disappeared. In early summer 2011, just as the Hendrickson file had been marked technical priority by the cold case unit following the DNA evidence review and GPR potential assessment, a completely unexpected development occurred from the very area investigators had long considered a focal point but lacked legal grounds to access for over a decade: technical well number 1. At that time, the land formerly owned by Goyer had been leased by the property management company to a small logging operation to expand an old logging road running through the regrown forest. As excavators and bulldozers began clearing uneven ground beside the road, a worker noticed the ground near well #1 was unusually sunken with signs of cracking and subsidence. After just a few passes of the bulldozer blade, the well mouth was exposed. The edge collapsed inward, revealing a deep dark void below. The worker immediately stopped the machine and approached to inspect. In the sunlight slanting through the canopy, he saw among the freshly collapsed soil a small piece of dark green fabric and a short bone segment protruding from the damp earth. Recognizing that this area had been linked to the Hendrickson family disappearance, he halted work and called the site supervisor. Less than 20 minutes later, an official call was routed to the nearest Michigan State Police post. MSP deployed a scene investigation team, sealed off the well-1 area, and suspended all logging activity. When technicians arrived, they immediately noted that the well mouth had collapsed due to bulldozer vibration, exposing soil of inconsistent color, a classic sign of soil disturbance, meaning the layer had been disturbed and recompacted differently from natural processes. To assess the extent, the MSP technical team proposed deploying the new generation GPR that the Cold Case Unit had recommended in its 2010 report. The land management company granted permission, as GPR involves no digging or structural damage. Within hours, the equipment was on site. The GPR scan results showed an anomalous response zone extending along the well's vertical axis, with strong signals at depths of 3 to 5 feet, indicating the likely presence of solid objects or unnaturally compacted soil layers inside the well. This was the first time in the entire case that investigators had sufficiently strong technical evidence to request an excavation warrant. While Cold Case Unit leadership worked with the court to obtain permission to dig the well, the scene team continued collecting exposed soil fragments and fabric pieces. The first bone fragment appeared to be an arm or thigh bone of a small child, but forensic identification was required. Once the warrant was approved, MSP deployed a standard excavation team for suspected illegal burial. Soil was removed layer by layer, bagged separately, and transferred to the forensic vehicle. After about 2 hours, the excavation team discovered additional smaller bone fragments, some with adhering soil and dark-colored fabric fibers. At deeper levels, they found an incomplete skull portion sized for a child, approximately 2 to 3 years old. The bone structure indicated the body had been placed in the well in a state of natural decomposition, without a coffin or container. This suggested it was not a standard technical well, but a concealed burial site. In total, the team recovered nearly 24 bone fragments, including long bones, skull pieces, 3 rib sections, and a small leg bone. All were sealed under the new case evidence codes and transferred to the Michigan State Police Forensic Lab. Since the Cold Case Unit had already collected reference DNA from Hendrickson relatives in 2010, comparison began immediately once the bone samples were cleaned and extracted. Soon afterward, results emerged. The samples matched perfectly with the mother's DNA in the reference set, identifying the victim as Caleb Hendrickson, age 2 at the time of the family's 1998 disappearance. This result became the biggest legal turning point since the case opened more than 13 years earlier. The discovery of remains, even partial, immediately shifted the file from missing persons to homicide investigation. This was no longer a case of a family voluntarily leaving or meeting with an accident. The presence of a child's body in an unusual technical well on Goyer's property, combined with evidence of intentional soil disturbance, confirmed that at least one family member had been unlawfully disposed of. The Cold Case Unit immediately forwarded information to the State Attorney General and formed a dedicated investigative task force, marking the escalation of the case from a silent scene for over a decade. Well #1 now became the center of a full criminal investigation. Investigators quickly created a new forensic file, noting that the body found in the well coincided temporally with Goyer's well digging in October 1998, just before the family's disappearance. Soil samples around the well were collected for layering analysis, burial timing determination, and comparison to natural area soil structure. The discovery of Caleb's remains not only provided the first physical evidence, but also validated Sheriff Marwick's 1998 suspicions about the well's unusual location. That same night, the Cold Case Unit officially upgraded the case, marked by an internal notice, Hendrickson case transferred to homicide investigation. Well #1 confirmed as illegal burial site. Related areas require expanded examination. From a completely traceless disappearance, the collapse of Well-1's mouth had unlocked the key that no one could reach for 13 years, direct evidence of a crime. Immediately after the remains in Well-1 were identified as Caleb Hendrickson, the cold case unit reopened the entire original 1998 file and began reconstructing the full sequence of events based on the new forensic data. The discovery of the body not only confirmed homicide, but also forced investigators to re-evaluate every statement, terrain detail, and anomaly that Sheriff Marwick had noted but could not prove at the time of the incident. The first step in the reinvestigation was recomparing Richard Goyer's original statement with the forensic data from Well-1. In the 1998 file, Goyer claimed the Hendricksons had told him they planned to go to Wisconsin for a few days and may have left without notifying him again. However, forensics showed Caleb was buried in the well very close to the digging date, that is late September to October 1998, exactly matching the family's disappearance timeline. This rendered Goyer's statement not only inaccurate, but directly contradictory to physical evidence. If the family had left, why was the child's body in a well on his land? When the cold case unit reviewed well digging maps and construction schedules, records clearly showed Well-1 and Well-2 were dug by a logging crew, managed by Goyer himself. Completion timing nearly overlapped with the 30-hour gap in the disappearance timeline that investigators had previously been unable to fill. The fact that one of the two wells contained a Hendrickson family member's body made Goyer's statement criminally suspicious. Moreover, when comparing Goyer's claim that the wells were dug for drainage with geological data, the forensic team confirmed Well-1 was located on high ground, with no natural drainage flow, and was completely useless technically. This made the hypothesis that the well was used as a burial site even clearer. To bolster the assessment, the cold case unit reviewed Goyer's 1998 supply purchase invoices. These documents had previously been deemed unimportant, but in the new context, they became valuable information. Invoices from a farm supply store in Munising showed Goyer purchased tarps, rope, and a substantial quantity of quicklime. Quicklime is commonly used to absorb soil moisture or control odor, but the amount Goyer bought was far excessive for basic maintenance on a small forest owner's land. When forensics compared this to the uneven soil compaction in Well-1, they suspected quicklime had been spread to mask early decomposition or reduce odor in the initial days after burial. One forensic technician noted in the report, based on soil layering and pH levels in samples from Well-1, quicklime was likely used here very close to the burial time. The presence of quicklime invoices, combined with recovered child bone and fabric fragments, completely eliminated any possibility of random coincidence. From here, the cold case unit began reconstructing the timeline of the night of October 17, 1998, by integrating new forensics with old statements. Based on the window between 9:37 p.m. and 11 p.m., the team assessed the family likely returned to the cabin before the incident occurred. The lack of struggle or forced entry signs at the cabin indicated that if a crime occurred, it happened outside the cabin or the family was somehow directed away from it. Combined with the fact that Well-1 had been dug just weeks before the disappearance, the cold case unit focused on determining who was near the well during that period. Re-examination of logging crew timesheets showed that on October 17 and 18, only two individuals were present near the well area, Richard Goyer and his assistant Joseph Mallard. Nolan's previous discomfort when questioned about the wells in 1998 was also re-evaluated. Applying modern behavioral analysis standards in criminal investigation, the team found Nolan's attempts to avoid questions about digging timing could indicate he knew the wells were not used for the stated purpose. However, forensics showed no evidence Nolan was at the scene on the disappearance date, but all data confirmed Goyer and Mallard had the greatest opportunity to carry out any activity related to the well. From the forensic data and 1998 statements, the cold case unit continued analyzing connections between evidence and possible actions. The 1998 child's jacket and 2007 shoe were returned to the lab to check whether they could match Caleb or other family members. Although DNA on the jacket was insufficient for identification, the size matched the older child's age group in the Hendrickson family. Thus, within a 4-mile radius of the cabin, items belonging to at least 2 children had been found, and one younger child's body buried in the well. This detail established a behavioral pattern. The crime did not occur at the cabin, but deeper in the forest, where the wells and trails had been used as logging crew staging points. This analysis led to the next critical question: if well #1 was used to bury Caleb's body, did well #2, dug at the same time, serve a similar role? The cold case unit began considering the possibility that well #2 contained remains or other evidence. Comparing 1998 logging activity maps, they noted well #2 was farther from the main logging road, in a more secluded position with less traffic. This made well #2 suitable as a second burial site or a location for evidence such as clothing, belongings, or even other remains. Since well #1 contained the young child's body, the cold case unit assessed the likelihood that other family members were disposed of similarly. For deeper evaluation, the team noted soil structure around well #2 showed similar compaction signs to well #1, though fainter. An MSP geologist recorded soil samples around well #2 indicate mechanical disturbance from late fall, 1998. However, no physical signs had surfaced because well #2 had never collapsed, like well #1. All these analyses led the cold case unit to conclude that the new forensic data had established a fundamental shift in case assessment. Goyer not only provided false statements, but likely participated directly in digging the wells as burial sites. Mallard, the only other person on the timesheet at that time, became the second person in the suspect pool. Through this, the entire reinvestigation process reconstructed a clearer behavioral timeline than in 1998. While shifting the case focus to evaluating intentional burial activity at the 2 wells dug shortly before the Hendrickson family disappeared. In early September 2011, when the forensic results from well #1 reinforced the determination that the 1998 disappearance was in fact a premeditated murder, the cold case unit began recontacting all individuals who had appeared in the original file, particularly those connected to the well digging process and logging activities that fall. Among them, Ray Nolan, a logging worker who had appeared evasive and given vague statements to Sheriff Marwick in 1998, became a priority for contact. He had left Michigan years earlier, working seasonally in Minnesota and occasionally returning to the Upper Peninsula for hunting season. Through information from Nolan's former employer, the cold case unit located him working at a small logging camp near Iron Mountain. 2 investigators were sent to meet him in person. Initially, Nolan seemed cautious, but when he learned that Caleb Hendrickson's body had been found and the case had become a murder investigation, his demeanor changed noticeably. After a few minutes of silence, he sighed and said it was time to tell what I saw, providing one of the most important statements in the entire case file, a statement he had withheld 13 years earlier out of fear of Goyer and because he felt he had no obligation to get involved in something that wasn't his business. According to Nolan, in late September 1998, exactly the period forensics determined Caleb was buried, Goyer had asked him and Joseph Mallard to assist in digging wells at 2 designated locations. Nolan clearly remembered that this was not a normal drainage well. The location was too far from natural water flow. The soil showed no signs of moisture or slippage, and most importantly, Goyer seemed extremely eager to complete it as quickly as possible. He also said that Goyer constantly paced around well #1 during the entire construction period, repeatedly instructing the workers to dig to the exact depth and not widen beyond the mouth. Nolan stated that it was Hendrickson whom Goyer specifically required to help dig well #1 for 2 consecutive days, a detail that perfectly matched the 2011 forensics, which showed the soil around the well was compacted in multiple distinct layers, indicating multiple people participated in different digging phases. Nolan described Hendrickson as appearing reluctant, several times saying he wanted to stop because he didn't understand the purpose of the well, but Goyer became irritated and threatened to cut his hours if he didn't continue. This was the first time a witness confirmed that Hendrickson had directly participated in digging the well, a particularly significant detail because forensics determined Caleb's body was buried in the very well that the child's father had been forced to dig. When asked why he hadn't revealed this in 1998, Nolan admitted he was afraid of Goyer, describing him as the kind of guy who didn't like being questioned, and that Mallard also appeared fearful, never daring to object. The statement became even more significant when Nolan recounted the events of the night of October 17th, the night the Hendrickson family vanished. He said that although he wasn't scheduled to work that day, he happened to be passing the logging road on his personal ATV just after dark, intending to stop by the cabin to return a chainsaw tool that Hendrickson had borrowed. Due to thick fog and the dark forest, he drove slowly and turned off the engine as he approached the cabin. From a distance, he saw a faint light coming from the edge of the tree line, not from the cabin but from a clearing more than 100 meters away, near the access path to well #1. He didn't get closer but clearly heard sounds carrying over loud arguing, mostly Goyer's voice yelling something. The other voice was lower, very likely Hendrickson's. Nolan recalled that the words weren't clear, but the tone showed extreme tension. He insisted he listened for no more than a minute, then heard the sound of something heavy hitting the ground, followed by sudden silence. Feeling the situation was abnormal, Nolan started his ATV and left immediately, not daring to return. This detail aligns significantly with the forensic timeline. The argument occurred between approximately 9:45 and 10:30 p.m., the exact behavioral gap period the cold case unit had identified after the family left the church service. Moreover, the thud on the ground sound and hearing Goyer's angry voice supported the hypothesis that a confrontation near the well led to at least one death. When cross-referenced with forensics, investigators noted that the soil layers inside well #1 showed signs of short-cycle compaction, consistent with hasty burial that night. Nolan further provided information about the ATV engine noise that neighbors had reported hearing around 11 p.m. Nolan said that sound wasn't from his ATV because he had left the area earlier, but it could very likely have been Mallard's, who often used the logging crew's ATV to check trails at Goyer's direction. Nolan remembered that Mallard would move through the forest at unusual hours when Goyer instructed him to clear the path or check access routes. This detail created an important link between the neighbors' statements and Mallard's suspicious activity in the immediate aftermath of the argument. Nolan's statement also emphasized that Mallard looked like he didn't want to be there during the well-digging days and repeatedly showed fear of Goyer. When forensics determined Caleb was buried in the well in October 1998, the testimony about tents and coerced digging became strong circumstantial evidence to infer that Goyer had planned to use the well as a burial site before the incident occurred, not a spontaneous act. Finally, Nolan affirmed that he didn't know what happened to the family after October 17th, but he was certain that what he heard wasn't a normal argument. When investigators overlaid this statement onto the 2011 forensic timeline, the entire data set aligned almost seamlessly. The well was dug just before the disappearance. Hendrickson was forced to work on it. Goyer and Hendrickson argued near the well. Unusual sounds occurred within the forensic determined burial window. An ATV appeared at the exact time neighbors heard an engine. After more than 13 years, the testimony of a witness who had remained silent out of fear became the most critical piece connecting behavior, timing, and location, confirming that what happened on October 17th was not a natural disappearance or accident, but a deliberate sequence of actions centered on well #1 and the only person with motive, means, and authority to carry it out, Richard Goyer. After Ray Nolan's statement reinforced the timeline and Goyer's behavior around well #1, the cold case unit turned to addressing the remaining major anomaly in the file, Goyer's pickup truck, the last vehicle seen carrying the Hendrickson family, which had been missing for 13 years. Since Nolan confirmed Goyer often used ATVs and small trucks to move through the forest on the night of October 17th, and forensics showed Caleb's body was buried very close to the disappearance time. The team assessed it as almost certain that the vehicle used to transport the body was this pickup. The issue was that in 1998, older sonar had yielded no results at the shallow lake near the logging road. But by 2011, technology had advanced. New generation sonar offered deep resolution, the ability to scan through thick mud layers and distinguish metal objects beneath sediment. The cold case unit decided to expand the scan to the small lake area more than a mile from the logging road, one of the 3 suspect locations Sheriff Marwick had marked in 1998. In the initial phase of the scan, sonar signals showed the lake surface dense with vegetation, but at a depth of about 12–14 feet, technicians detected a strong rectangular return signal with dimensions matching a pickup-sized vehicle. When scanned from 3 different angles, the object's shape became clearer, length approximately 16 feet, width about 6 feet, metal structure covered in mud, but still appearing as sharp outlines on the sonar map. This was the first time in over a decade that investigators had physical evidence of where the truck had vanished. The MSP immediately sealed off the area and called in a specialized recovery team. The operation took many hours because the vehicle was sunk deep in heavy mud, requiring steel cables and lift bags to bring it to the surface. Finally, in the late afternoon, the dark brown pickup was pulled from the lake bottom, thick mud coating making it nearly unrecognizable at first. After initial pressure washing, the license plate and VIN emerged, confirming it was indeed Richard Goyer's pickup, the vehicle the Hendrickson family used on the night of the disappearance. The rear cab windows were shattered, the interior almost completely rotted, but the metal structures remained intact enough to collect fiber and soil samples. When the truck was transferred to the forensic lab, technicians proceeded to collect fabric fibers, debris, and mud samples from the rear floor and front seats. They focused on the truck bed floor, the area believed to be where heavy objects or bodies were transported during the incident. During sample processing, they found numerous dark blue microfiber strands, very similar to fibers recovered from clothing fragments mixed in the well-1 soil layers. After comparative testing, results showed the fibers in the truck and those from well-1 matched in structure, material, and wear characteristics, determined as a high-confidence match. This meant the same material present in well-1 was inside the pickup, creating a direct link between body transport and the disposed vehicle. Beyond fibers, forensics also discovered soil traces adhered to the undercarriage of the truck bed, with soil structure and micromineral composition matching samples from the edge of well-1, including the organic ratio and distinctive red mineral grains characteristic of that site. Although lake water had washed away most biological traces, the soil material match was a key indicator. The pickup had been right at the well in the period immediately before being dumped in the lake. From an investigative standpoint, recovering the truck simultaneously answered 2 major questions. 1, the vehicle used to transport Caleb's body was Goyer's pickup, and 2, disposing of the truck was deliberate to erase traces across the logging roads, consistent with the fact that no fresh tire tracks were found in 1998. Additionally, forensics confirmed the truck was driven into the lake using mechanical force or reversed from the water's edge, matching sonar data and the steep terrain created by prior logging. When combined with Nolan's testimony about the ATV sounds, the argument, and the presence of both Goyer and Millard near the well, with the sonar results and truck fibers, the cold case unit had the strongest chain of links since reopening the case. Well-1 as the burial site, the pickup as the transport vehicle, and truck disposal to conceal the route. The interim conclusion was recorded in the Phase 2 forensic report. Pickup recovered from lake confirms deliberate concealment of transport vehicle. Fiber linkage between truck bed and well-1 establishes physical connection between vehicle and burial site. Soil sample match further strengthens inference of transport route. These lines marked a pivotal turning point in the file. The pickup was no longer an unanswered major question but strong evidence fitting tightly with every forensic piece from well-1. Investigators could now identify the body transport tool and concealment method, a key factor in advancing toward determining individual roles in the sequence of actions on October 17, bringing the case closer to identifying the person directly responsible for the murder and disposal. With the pickup recovered and bed fibers matching clothing fragments from well #1, the cold case unit revisited the list of individuals present in the logging area at the time the Hendrickson family vanished. Both the 1998 file and the 2011 reconstructed timeline pointed to two people with potential access to the well in the critical time frame: Richard Goyer and his assistant Joseph Mallard. However, Goyer had died in 2009 from heart failure, with valid death records and medical certification, removing him from prosecutable scope. This shifted the entire investigative focus to Mallard, the only surviving person present at the potential crime scene, with direct ties to both well digging and logging crew vehicle management. Mallard had been briefly interviewed in 1998, but featured little in documentation due to lack of physical evidence linking him. But in 2011, new forensic data, Nolan's testimony, and the pickup's emergence required a comprehensive re-examination of Mallard's role. The team contacted the former Goyer-owned logging company to retrieve any remaining equipment records, including ATV usage logs, old handheld GPS units, and trail inspection logs. Notably, in 1998, the logging crew had tested an early forestry GPS device that only recorded major coordinate points when the user stopped or remained stationary long enough. This data had never been examined in the original investigation due to technological limitations and because no one thought it relevant to the disappearance. When the cold case unit recovered the old storage device, they discovered a log with dates close to the night the family vanished. The log recorded only 3 coordinates, all within logging route boundaries. One coordinate specifically matched the location of well #1. Timestamp data showed the device recorded that point on the evening of October 17, between 10:41 p.m. and 10:56 p.m., perfectly aligning with the forensic timeline reconstructed from Ray Nolan's testimony and the period neighbors heard ATV engine noise. Since Mallard was the only person assigned the forestry GPS device by the logging crew that day, the cold case unit determined he had been at the well during the window the Hendrickson family was believed to have vanished. This was the first technical piece directly linking Mallard to the burial site. When summoned for questioning, Mallard appeared tense but tried to remain calm. He claimed he had left the logging site early that evening and did not return to the forest. However, when investigators presented the GPS information, Mallard said the device might have been used by someone else or could have recorded incorrectly due to signal loss. But when asked to describe events on October 17, Mallard's timeline kept shifting. First, he said he was home. Second, walking around the property. Third, with Goyer for a while. This continual inconsistency was noted in the record as evasive behavior. When comparing current statements to his 1998 interview, the cold case unit noted Mallard had previously said he did nothing after work hours and did not go near the well area. But new forensics confirmed someone was at the well during the exact burial window. The forestry GPS logs, though crude and limited, proved Mallard was there. Combined with Nolan's testimony that Mallard often used the ATV at Goyer's command and appeared fearful regarding the well, the behavioral picture became clearer. Mallard was not only present at the well, but likely assisted Goyer in transporting and disposing of the body. Based on Michigan's probable cause standard, the cold case unit determined there was sufficient basis for arrest. Mallard was at the scene during the burial time. He provided false timelines, the GPS device recorded his position, evasive behavior fit the post-offense pattern and direct ties to vehicles confirmed through logging crew management records. An arrest warrant was signed by the local court based on new forensic evidence, key testimony, and technical data supporting his likely participation in concealing Caleb's body. With Mallard becoming the official suspect, the case entered a new phase from reconstructing the past to confronting the only living person who knew what happened on the night of October 17, 1998. The arrest warrant for Joseph Mallard was executed on an early winter morning in 2011 when the sky over Munising was still shrouded in white fog and the surface of Lake Superior had frozen into thin layers floating along the rocky edges. Mallard was arrested at the old family home of his wife, where he had been living in hiding for many years after Goyer's death. When the investigators approached, he did not resist, only stammering, "Why now?" But they offered no answer beyond reading out the 4 charges: tampering with evidence, improper disposal of a body, obstruction of justice, and accessory to homicide after the fact. The decision not to prosecute him directly for murder reflected the lack of evidence showing that Mallard caused Caleb's death, but the evidence of his involvement in the disposal process was too clear for the court to deny an arrest warrant. Mallard was handcuffed, placed in a vehicle, and transferred directly to Alger County, where he spent the first 48 hours in temporary detention before being moved to MSP for further interrogation. News of the arrest spread quickly through the Munising community, which had lived for years with vague memories of the Hendrickson family's disappearance, and the fact that someone had finally been arrested made the town's atmosphere heavy, mixed with astonishment and a sense that this has finally happened. After the indictment was completed, the preliminary trial was scheduled for early 2012. The Michigan State Prosecutor, working in coordination with the MSP investigation team and the cold case unit, prepared an indictment based on a chain of evidence spanning from 1998 to 2011, considered one of the most complex evidence chains in the region's cold cases. On the opening day of the trial, the prosecutor presented the chain of evidence in chronological order. First, well #1, where the small skeleton was discovered after the well mouth collapsed. Next, the bone fragments and fabric fibers, with DNA confirming the victim as Caleb Hendrickson, then forensic results, proving the soil had been deliberately disturbed. Following that, the prosecution presented the recovery of Goyer's pickup from the shallow lake and demonstrated that fibers found in the truck bed matched those at well #1, linking the vehicle to the transportation of the body. The chain continued with GPS forestry logs, showing that the person holding the device, confirmed to be Mallard, was present at the exact location of well #1 during the time frame when the Hendrickson family disappeared. Finally, the prosecution introduced the testimony of Ray Nolan, a witness who had remained silent but now confirmed that Goyer forced Hendrickson to dig the well and described the sounds of arguing and heavy thuds coming from the direction of the well on the night of October 17, 1998. This chain of evidence was seen as the strongest point of the case. No single piece was enough to convict on its own, but together, they painted a picture of Mallard being at the scene, in charge of the vehicle, participating in digging the well, and assisting Goyer in the disposal. In their argument, the prosecution emphasized that Mallard was not the one who killed Caleb, but he had helped conceal the crime, transport the body, and follow Goyer's orders in the cover-up. In contrast, the defense focused on 3 main points. First, they argued that the 1998 GPS forestry logs were unreliable because early devices were prone to signal interference. Second, they contended that the matching fibers did not prove Mallard was in the truck bed on the night of the incident, since the pickup had been used by many people in the logging crew. And third, they attempted to discredit Nolan's testimony by emphasizing that he had waited 13 years to tell the truth, making it unreliable. However, the prosecutor successfully rebutted each point. Regarding the GPS, MSP brought in an expert to affirm that although the forestry device was primitive, it had a mechanism that recorded coordinates only when stationary for a prolonged period, meaning Mallard had stood at the well location rather than just passing by. Regarding the fibers, in-depth forensic analysis showed that the wear pattern on the fabric was consistent with being heavily compressed in the truck bed, something that could not occur if the fibers had merely accidentally adhered during normal use. Regarding Nolan's testimony, the prosecution argued that the prolonged silence stemmed from fear of Goyer, a man whom both Nolan and Mallard had described as prone to outbursts and highly influential in the logging crew. More importantly, Nolan's testimony aligned almost perfectly with the forensic timeline of the body's burial. After a week of arguments and 3 days of witness examination, the trial moved to jury deliberation. The evidence was insufficient to conclude that Mallard killed Caleb, but it was clear he had participated in the disposal and cover-up. Ultimately, the jury found Mallard guilty on 3 of the 4 charges: tampering with evidence, improper disposal of a body, and obstruction of justice. The charge of accessory to homicide after the fact was dismissed due to lack of evidence that he knew the full details of the events or participated in the act that caused death. Mallard was convicted at the end of the second day of deliberation, with a 10+2 verdict as permitted under Michigan law. At sentencing, the judge considered the severity of the actions, the 13 years Mallard had kept the information secret, and the impact of the body disposal on the investigation. Based on federal sentencing guidelines for improper disposal of a body related to a homicide, he sentenced Mallard to 24 years in federal prison. The state of Michigan then added 10 years for obstruction of justice, but allowed concurrent serving due to the defendant's advanced age and lack of prior violent convictions. Mallard was transferred directly to the Department of Corrections to begin serving his sentence the next day. In the prison transfer records, a summary note on Mallard's actions was coded according to state investigation standards, assisting in burying the body, disposing of the vehicle, providing false timelines, and obstructing the investigation for over a decade. The sentencing closed the most significant legal phase of the case, transforming Mallard from an obscure name in the 1998 logging crew into the individual held legally accountable for his role in one of Michigan's most complex cold cases. When the sentence for Joseph Mallard was handed down and his legal file was transferred to the Department of Corrections, the Michigan State Police proceeded with the final summary step for the Hendrickson case. Although the reinvestigation from 2010 to 2012 had broken a deadlock lasting over a decade, and for the first time confirmed this as an intentional homicide, the remaining truth was still heavy. Only one of the 6 victims had been found. The body of Caleb Hendrickson, just 2 years old when buried in well #1, was the only evidence recovered. There were no traces of the remaining 5 family members, no bones, no belongings, no clues leading directly to their burial site or the final events they experienced. Many critical questions remained unanswered. Did they die at the same time or at different times? Where were they processed? And were they in the same area as Caleb or disposed of by other means? The biggest question revolved around well #2. Since 1998, this well had been marked by Sheriff Marwick as the second unusual location, dug at the same time as well #1, and located deeper in the forest. When the case was reopened in 2011, forensic technicians assessed well #2 as showing similar signs of disturbance to well #1, but weaker and without a collapsed mouth to expose evidence. The major issue lay in the geological structure. Well #2 was much deeper, situated in steeply sloped terrain with unstable soil walls, and the surface had been overgrown with tightly intertwined tree roots over more than a decade. The MSP report stated that excavating well #2 carried the risk of causing a total landslide in the surrounding area and posed serious danger to the digging team. At the same time, there was no direct evidence sufficient to convince a court to approve excavation at such high risk. Therefore, well #2 was officially recorded as a suspected location containing remains, but could not be excavated with available technology. The final MSP summary report divided the file into 2 parts: the resolved portion and the ongoing open portion. The resolved portion included the death of Caleb Hendrickson, Mallard's disposal actions, and the unauthorized burial carried out under Goyer's direction. The forensic evidence was strong enough to legally close this part. However, the rest, where the 5 remaining Hendrickson family members had not been found, remained open and classified as an active cold case. MSP noted that, although no living suspects could be directly prosecuted for murder, the search for the victims' bodies remained an ongoing task. In an internal report, the cold case unit stated clearly, the area around well #2 and nearby forest regions are likely to contain the remains of the remaining victims. Excavation will require future forensic technology, including high-depth GPR, next-generation microsoil analysis, and underground survey robots. The file was updated in the modern cold case system, marking that although the largest legal portion had concluded, the case was not considered fully closed. MSP also issued a public notice to the Munising community, confirming that the 5 remaining Hendrickson family members were still missing and calling for any information, no matter how small, from the public. After nearly 14 years of investigation and reinvestigation, the case ended with a truth that was both illuminated and incomplete. The nature of the crime had been proven, the person who helped conceal it had been held accountable, but most of the story of that family of 6 still lay silent in the Hiawatha Forest, somewhere beneath the cold soil, waiting for a day when technology is advanced enough to find them and bring them home. The story of the Hendrickson case. Though it occurred in the isolated space of the Hiawatha Forest in 1998, carries a weight that transcends time and touches on issues that American society today still faces: the fragility of rural communities, the limits of investigative systems in the face of technological progress, and the role of each individual when confronted with evil. The complete disappearance of the Hendrickson family, leaving no trace beyond a child's jacket and a shoe that appeared years later, shows that in sparsely populated areas, where the distance between homes can be miles, safety does not come from living privately, but from connectivity. In this story, it was isolation that allowed the crime to occur without anyone noticing in time, and it also caused justice to wait more than 13 years to reveal the truth. Today in the United States, from the Appalachian regions to western forest communities, that lesson remains intact. Neighborly concern, maintaining contact, and checking on one another in small communities are the most important barriers against domestic violence and hidden crime. Another major lesson comes from the fact that the pickup and well-hashed one only became evidence thanks to modern forensic technology. This reminds us that many unsolved cases are not due to lack of effort, but to the limitations of the era. Therefore, faith in science, in preserving even the smallest evidence, and in the persistence of investigative agencies, is essential. Finally, Ray Nolan's testimony, who remained silent for 13 years out of fear of Goyer, is powerful proof that one person's silence can prolong the pain of an entire community. In the United States today, where movements to protect witnesses, protect whistleblowers, and encourage reporting of dangerous behavior are growing strongly, the story emphasizes one thing: sometimes the courage to speak the truth not only helps resolve one crime, but also protects countless others from similar tragedies. Thank you for joining us on this journey to uncover the truth in one of Michigan's most shocking cold cases. If you'd like to continue exploring stories recreated with this level of investigative depth, please subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.